This revolting creature resembles a cross between a gangly human and a bloated spider. It has long, slender arms and legs protruding from a rounded, fleshy body. It has a spider's head with a pair of bulbous black eyes. Coarse, dark hairs cover its ungainly body alongside a massive potbelly filled with the remains of your adventurer friends it just ate. Today we're going to talk about the Ettercap, a bipedal spider creature for once not actually associated with Lolth or her spiders. In fact, the beginning of the Ettercap race has long since been a mystery until today. But before we get into that, let's talk about our sponsor today. This video is brought to you by HelloFresh, America's #1 meal kit. Look guys, we live in 2021 and we are very close to 2022. We gotta get in with the times. The reality is that nobody got time to go to the grocery stores anymore, and delivery is where things are at now. Did you know that the average trip to the grocery store takes 41 minutes? And that is if you know what you're looking for. For the longest time, the answer was getting your fast food delivered, but then you're still dealing with unhealthy fast food that is crazy high in sodium. And don't even let me get started on how those companies price gouge you for that service. Instead, what you need to do is sign up with HelloFresh. These guys deliver to your home the recipe and all the ingredients that you need in order to make the food yourself, but more so than that, it is literally cheaper than going to the grocery store. That's what's wild to me about this. And look at this. You set it up so that you get sent 3 different recipes a week, and look at the price per serving. That is crazy low, especially if you live in an expensive area. See, when you go to the grocery store, you actually always end up with more food than what you need, whereas HelloFresh will send you the exact amount of ingredients that you need for the meal that you're preparing. So ironically, it doubles up as being extremely environmentally conscious because you're never throwing away extra food and you're not using the gas to drive. There's tons of menus to pick from, tons of different options to suit your palate and your dietary restrictions, and most of all, super cheap, especially if you use my coupon code. Use my link or go to HelloFresh.com and use code RHEXXART for up to 16 free meals plus 3 surprise gifts across 6 HelloFresh boxes plus free shipping. Gifts include free appetizers, free desserts, and free premium recipes. Don't miss out. With the new year coming up, it is time to make a change. We always set ourselves up for failure with unrealistic New Year's resolutions, and we always struggle to keep them. And with food, that is especially so. You always want to add that extra bar of butter, you always want to increase your portion sizes, but no more of that. This year, do things differently and regain control over your food choices. HelloFresh.com. Now back to the video. First, before we start, let's see what the monster manual actually tells us. Ettercaps are humanoid spiders that tend, feed, and watch over spiders the way a shepherd oversees a flock of sheep. They lair deep in remote forests. Fine strands of silk stream from glands in an Ettercap's abdomen, letting it shoot sticky strands of webbing to bind and trap or strangle its victims. It can also use this webbing to fashion elaborate snares and nets, which often festoon its lair. Nothing particularly new here for a hybrid between a humanoid and a spider so far. In here, they tell us that the Ettercaps use stealth to hide while their targets get trapped in their cunning web traps. It does specify, though, that they design their traps so that people actually die in them, not just get stuck. And that's actually very important, and it is very easy to miss. They don't expand on that at all, but we can talk about it later. And here they talk about how Ettercaps essentially ruin the forest in which they lair by turning them into web-infested glooms, where spiders and other terrible creatures roam. And then lastly, the Ettercaps are enemies of the Fae. It says here that they happily entrap the sprites and pixies and then devour them. Not much that Druids can do against them either, since their webbing is just that strong. But that's about it, a very short lore entry there. Over here we can see that they're actually fairly intelligent for a bestial monstrosity, but otherwise just very standard stuff, just what you would expect. It can easily climb walls and ceilings, it can locate objects and creatures that touch its webbing, and it is not affected by the sickness of his or other webs. Down here we can see that they do share a common feature of many spiders, which is of course powerful poisons. Their bite deals poison damage, though it doesn't quite seem to be as deadly in this stat block. The poison just seems to be more like a nuisance, if anything. Some natural claw attacks, and then an ability to spew webbing at a distance as a form of attack. They do give us a neat trick here that Ettercaps can do, which they can form weapons out of their very own webbing, in particular a club, which does allow them to grapple targets with its stickiness, but that's about it. Just a short page description, nothing too particularly crazy, but now we should enter the crazy. Let's talk about what they don't tell you about the Ettercaps. The first question that one should have about really any monstrosity in the world of Dungeons & Dragons is, where does it come from? Every creature has its start somewhere, and you know humanoids and normal beasts generally happen through evolution and or godly creation. Aberrations come from other worlds, outsiders like devils and angels come from other planes, but monstrosities in particular generally are just normal creatures that have been distorted with magic, which implies some magical shenanigan must have happened along the way, and that makes them interesting. Now you're gonna like this, because you definitely did not see this one coming. Ettercaps are, in some ways, what happened to druids that venerated spiders a long time ago. Technically, you could say these are were-spiders that simply lost their humanity. The story claims that centuries ago, the veneration of spiders within druidic sects was not quite as rare as it might be today. Of course, spiders being just another facet of nature. It makes sense to venerate all beasts as a druid in one way or another, but there are certain problems with spiders that are not generally found in many other beasts. A druid that wall shapes into a bear to live among them can cohabitate very happily with them without harming the environment. If you wall shape into a wolf, then you do have to, hunt game and kill other beasts, but you can do so while maintaining the ecosystem, not a problem. The issue that started to transpire was that the druids that were wall shaping and living as spiders were starting to act upon and enjoying the act of cannibalism that is actually very prevalent among arachnids. It is not a hidden fact that druids that spend too much time in their animal shapes will start behaving more and more like the animals even while they are no longer wild shapes. And so, well, you can see where this is going. Druids started practicing cannibalism even outside of their wild shapes, becoming more and more lost in their dark practices. The story then claims that druids that would fall for this line of spider living would be approached by fiends. The records don't really show exactly what kind of creature this could be. Some say that it might have been some kind of corrupted servant of Mishka the wolf spider, a demon we talked about in our video on the Abyss, or really any other kind of arachnid fiend. But in any case, the fiends would promote more and more spider behavior, and the druids would accept. And the reason they would accept is because typically druids that commit acts against nature, which you can reason that cannibalism is, they lose their powers. Remember that druid magic is divine magic. It comes from the gods, and when a druid does not behave, well, they lose them. So these druids would be very easy pickings for these kind of fiends who would not just offer them power, but would also offer them something closer to what the druids wanted than druidic magic could ever do. These fiends taught them how to live like spiders in their humanoid forms, how to imbibe poisons, how to talk to spiders, how to live in webbings. Eventually, the fiends would offer them magical potions that would modify their shape into a more spidery form, and after decades and decades of this, those druids would slowly turn into something that today we would recognize as something close to the Ettercaps. And these creatures would eventually leave these communities or betray the fiends and then go out on their own, and throughout the centuries, they simply would procreate and forgot about their past and completely lost their humanity. And so now, you have what is essentially a were-spider, and that's the story. And this is why the creature doesn't quite have all the legs that a spider would, and why it walks around upright. It is also the reason why behind this very large mandibles, there hides a row of human-like teeth. You probably didn't know that either. Now that we're at it, let's actually talk about their physiology. This always tends to be your guys' favorite topic, and mine too, of course. Ettercaps have a normal-looking mouth, albeit devoid of flesh, which comes back to their human roots. Inside, they have a tongue that forms the shape of a tube, which they use to drink the bodily fluids of the creatures that they kill. Before eating, Ettercaps typically drool a bunch of enzymes onto the body of their meal in order to decompose it and then allow for their arachnic body to digest it. The fangs of the Ettercap are extremely flexible and actually allow for the manipulation of small items. In fact, technically they are so adept at using their fangs that you could literally count them as a third hand for the creature. The arachnic body allows the creature to perform shockingly impressive feats of sleight of hand, especially so when, as you would imagine, kneading and then creating traps and objects using their webbing. When it comes to reproduction, the human part and the arachnid part both work in concert. Ettercaps have sex the human way, the normal way, but then the female produces an inseminated massive spider egg that is laid externally. Inside of this egg are scores and scores of tiny Ettercap young. The egg will be about 2 to 3 feet long and then will be completely covered in sticky webs meant to protect them. And then generally they will be hung in clusters with more eggs along the ceilings of structures or the walls of trees or any other form of elevated object. The eggs will hatch in about 3 months, where 30 to 80 tiny and half-formed Ettercaps babies will spread out. It is nightmare fuel. Now, these babies are a menace and are extremely dangerous because when they come out in a literal swarm of bloodthirsty, hungry spider monsters. And remember, these spiders are cannibalistic in nature. They will 100,000% eat mom and dad and all the brothers that they can. And so, what Ettercaps do is they make sure to catch a very large prey in order to sacrifice it to the babies. This could be an elk or a human or any other kind of creature of decent size. They will make sure to leave that creature alive, since of course, as you can imagine, Ettercaps prefer to eat live prey. They're kind of messed up that way. And then they hang that person or creature very close to the eggs that are about to hatch. Now, if there are no humans or elk or any suitable food sources to be delivered to the babies in sacrifice, then the Ettercap parents have to literally just abandon their lair for days, or else risk getting eaten by the swarm. Most babies are not meant to survive, and in fact, the vast majority will die due to starvation, the elements, cannibalism from their brothers, and sometimes even from just getting eaten by their very own mother as a snack. Hey, look, it happens. The amount of food that a typical Ettercap requires is so intense, and there's such a large amount of Ettercap babies that are born simultaneously that survival is near impossible for each of the individual babies. And so, after their numbers have dwindled considerably and presumably only the strongest babies are left, then the mother will pick no more than 3 of them in order for her to raise, protect, and personally feed until they reach about 4 years of age and become mature. The rest of the babies will certainly die. Ettercaps live for about 50 years and they never really stop growing, so a very old Ettercap becomes very, very large. But those are very rare since they're always out there attacking things and eating things, and they generally live a very violence-full life, so they tend to die earlier. Now, you guys know that I do tend to be generally harsh on the 5th edition Monster Manual whenever they leave something out, but generally, it tends to be for nerdy reasons like lore that might not be that crucial, though sometimes it does feel like they really dropped the ball hard. Ettercaps are supposed to have the same poison as giant spiders do. I mean, like, that's their whole thing. The whole thing is that they're partially giant spiders themselves. The venom of an Ettercap is in fact technically supposed to be even more potent than a giant spider, and that's why it is supposed to be extremely valuable. A single ounce of Ettercap poison is meant to go in the open market for about 1,000 gold pieces, but when you look at the 5th edition entry, you will notice that the poison is actually quite terrible. It does 1d8 poison damage and it has a low chance of leaving you poisoned. Now, this is what the poison is supposed to do. Look at this. The giant spider poison does 2d8 damage and has a chance at leaving you poisoned, but the important thing is that if you're poisoned, then you become paralyzed upon being reduced to 0 hit points. That is the real kicker. See, the whole point of the poison in the first place is not to deal damage. The Ettercap doesn't care about damage. What the Ettercap actually cares about is eating its meal alive, because that's how spiders and Ettercaps enjoy it. You know, it's kind of a big slip up there, I think. Now, in terms of food, the Ettercap will eat any meat, regardless of any type of creature from which it comes, as we mentioned before, even including its own kind. When the Ettercap eats, it attempts to devour the whole creature in one single sitting, as much as it can. Ettercaps rarely ever go back to a previous kill in order to finish it. They just eat as much as possible the first time around and then leave. And their physiology actually allows for this kind of behavior by granting them a very expansive stomach to accommodate all that food, which is actually why the Ettercap looks the way it does. If you see, their big bulging beer belly is there for a reason. It's not just to make the creature look quirky or silly. It does have a purpose. See, rarely you will find that things don't have explanations. It doesn't really happen that often. When a creature looks funky or has like a weird thing about itself, generally there is a reason for that to be the case. It's just that the Monster Manual doesn't always give you the context. For example, the lore states that an Ettercap can eat an entire deer in a single sitting, which is like unbelievably insane. Now let's talk about their psychology. Quote, The Ettercap's mixed arachnid humanoid brain sets a natural limit on its emotional and intellectual capacity. Rooted in their collective consciousness, however, is a connection to arachnid life that extends far beyond shared appearance, a holdover from the druidic rites that ultimately inspired the race's creation. Ettercaps feel instinctually obligated to serve as a kind of warden to all arachnid life and to increase their own numbers. Excessive sentiment results in survival risks. Other Ettercaps are only needed for breeding, and thus, groups of Ettercaps larger than a pair are rare. They believe that life and death serve as the only real, tangible truths, and thus they do not recognize any deities or other moral codes. Religion and higher thought do not place victims in the web. In some extraordinary rare conditions, a particularly intelligent Ettercap, usually a female, appears and gathers a large number of Ettercaps and other arachnids around her. These leaders are often motivated by destructive humanoid incursions and great loss of arachnid life, to strike out from their webs and stalk prey back to its home. These forays can lead to whole humanoid communities besieged by swarms of Ettercaps, monstrous spiders, spider swarms, and other arachnid monstrosities." End quote. Now, in the eyes of a normal spider, an Ettercap is also just another spider. There's nothing particularly unique or special about an Ettercap in the eyes of a spider, except for the fact that the Ettercaps produce a form of pheromone that makes spiders feel high. It gives them a strong sense of euphoria, which of course makes spiders want to live close to and tag along the Ettercaps. And with the Ettercap being able to communicate with spiders, it does kind of allow them to basically manipulate them in whatever way they want, because the spiders would want to follow them because they get high. Now that is something that the Monster Manual would not tell you. Now, another thing that you probably didn't know about Ettercaps, since it was kind of left out of the Monster Manual, is that they do indeed have the ability to speak Common. Now, not all of them necessarily do, since it is a language that too many of them have been lost, but some of them in fact do. In particular on the, large communities of Ettercaps that might reside inside of a massive sprawling complex of tunnels. They call it the Old Tongue, and will actually be the language that they will use in order to speak to one another or to trick people into walking into their web traps. But of course, those Ettercaps that do not have access to the language, instead they communicate with one another using a series of high-pitched chittering noises, shrieks, and violent actions. Now, even though Ettercaps tend to be fairly solitary most of the time, they do have those big sprawling communities. Though when I say community, I don't necessarily mean that they live close to each other. See, Ettercaps, they link their layers together via webbing, and so a big cave system could be miles and miles long, and all of it connected via webbing. So technically, they are kind of a community in the sense that they share webbing together, but these layers could be miles apart. The webbing, though, is very important, since any creature that touches it immediately alerts the Ettercaps, since the webbing produces these very small vibrations upon being touched, and is mostly imperceptible to the human eye. But an Ettercap, which is resting on a part of the webbed system, would be able to sense the vibration and be able to know exactly where in the entire sprawling complex you are very specifically located. So be very careful there. If the vibrations are massive, as in if there was an entire soldier squad that had been sent into the caverns to quell the Ettercap population, many of them could answer the call together alongside the spider servants and wreak havoc. Now, of course, as the Monster Manual mentioned, the Ettercaps are notoriously good at creating traps, and I would be remiss not to mention that in at least some way. We do have some examples of traps that they can set. There's the baited limb and poison spikes. Quote, "The most intelligent Ettercaps have noticed that a humanoid creature, wrapped tight in webs and suspended as bait from a weakened tree limb, often attracts other humanoids. The victim moves out onto the limb, which breaks, dropping him and the bait into the Ettercap's web. The trap is even more effective if the bait is left screaming for help and the ground is planted with sticks covered in the Ettercap's poison." End quote. Then there's the dancing dead man. Quote, "Ettercaps create dancing dead men by filling humanoid husks with rocks, wet leaves, and liquid webbing. Once attached to a strong web and placed to swing onto the victim's path, the device behaves as a pendulum-style giant sap that burst upon hitting the target, covering it in webs, end quote. So there it is, a short and sweet video on the Ettercap. I hope you guys enjoyed it. But last thing I do want to mention before we finish the video, which is crucially important, okay, is that generally speaking, when you read these monster manual entries on the Ettercap, they will tell you that these creatures shoot their webbing from their lower abdominal area. However, the reality is that they shoot it from a gland that rests, quote, near the anus, end quote. I am here to give you guys the lore, okay? I am here to give you guys the truth. And I will not pass up on reading the word anus on the first edition monster manual and somehow not using it on my video. You are all welcome. I would like to thank my patron supporters Barry Mascan, 5e Magic Shop, Morgan Johnson, Rusty Rain, Duck Feeder, The Great Codini, Omega Scales, Terry Kolb, Benjamin Bosters, Falky951, Ordorix, Abim Kurshap, Solarensis, Thomas Hunt, Nathan McCumb, Soulless Rider, Lost Crusaders, Stalia, Olaf Gleb, JD Green, Treb909, Tony Arcee, Famine52, George Futland, Sovereign Mind, Trevor Hess, The Living Guild Pack, Streeblow, Natora Shura, Brian Camp, Shad Aga, John the Wicked, Shane and Sam Skinner, Stephen, D-Scribe, Herbert Johnson, The Wizard's Vault, James the Perverted, Shoddycast, Horrorbound, Jesse Feliciano, Munchkin Mania, Baruch, and Simon Landreville for supporting me on Patreon at the $25 level. If you would like to support me as well, then please head on over to patreon.com/MrRex to support. Thank you guys for watching, thank you guys for being here, thank you for all of you being awesome, and I'll see you all next time.